I never thought I would become the villain of Cedar Ridge Estates, simply because I wanted to keep the firewood I chopped myself. But apparently that is exactly what happened when Brenda Patterson decided my personal property was community property. It started on a cold November morning in Cedar Ridge, Montana, when I was stacking the last cord of firewood behind my garage. I had spent the better part of 3 weekends driving up to my buddy's property in the mountains, cutting down dead trees he needed cleared, splitting the logs, and hauling everything back in my truck. My back ached, my hands were covered in blisters despite the gloves, and I was proud of the neat rows of seasoned oak and pine that would keep me warm all winter. I am Quentin Larson, 42 years old, and I have lived in this neighborhood for 5 years. I work as a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant about 30 miles outside of town. I bought this house after my divorce, looking for a fresh start and a place where I could have some peace. The house came with 2 acres, which was more land than most properties in the HOA, and I loved the privacy it provided. I had a small workshop, room for a garden, and enough space to store my firewood and work on projects without neighbors complaining. The HOA here was generally tolerable. We had monthly meetings that I usually skipped, a modest annual fee of $300, and some basic rules about keeping your lawn maintained and not painting your house neon colors. For the most part, everyone minded their own business. That changed about 2 years ago when Brenda Patterson moved into the neighborhood and immediately got herself elected as HOA president. Brenda was 53, divorced twice, and had the kind of energy that made you tired just watching her. She had short blonde hair that she kept in that aggressive soccer mom style, always wore workout clothes even though I never saw her exercise, and drove a white Escalade with a "Live, Laugh, Love" sticker on the back window. Within 3 months of taking over as president, she had reorganized the entire HOA structure, created 5 new committees, and started sending out violation notices for things nobody had ever cared about before. I was finishing up my stacking when I heard her voice calling from my driveway. "Quentin, oh Quentin, do you have a moment?" I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked around the garage. Brenda stood there with another woman I recognized as Susan Chen, the HOA secretary. Both of them had clipboards, which was never a good sign. "Hey Brenda, Susan, what can I do for you?" Brenda gave me that smile that did not reach her eyes. "We were just doing a walkthrough of the neighborhood and noticed your impressive firewood supply. That must have taken quite a bit of work." "It did. Been working on it for the past few weekends." "Well, it looks wonderful. So neatly organized too." She glanced at Susan, who nodded. "Actually, that is why we wanted to talk to you. As you know, we installed that beautiful community fire pit in the common area last month. It has been such a hit with the residents." I knew where this was going, but I let her continue. "The thing is, we have been purchasing firewood from the hardware store, and it is getting quite expensive. A bundle costs $15 and only lasts for 1 fire. We have been going through 2 or 3 bundles every time we have a community gathering." She paused, waiting for me to offer something. When I did not, she continued. "We were thinking, since you have so much firewood, perhaps you could donate some to the community fire pit. It would really help with our budget, and it would be a wonderful way for you to contribute to neighborhood unity." I crossed my arms. "I appreciate the thought, Brenda, but I cut and split all this wood myself. I need it for my own fireplace this winter." "Oh, surely you do not need all of it," she laughed, but it sounded forced. "You must have 4 or 5 cords there. That is enough to heat 3 houses." "Actually, it is 3 cords, and with the way winter gets here in Montana, I will use most of it. Last year I went through about 2.5 cords." Susan spoke up for the first time. "We would only need a little bit, Quentin. maybe half a cord for the whole winter. That would still leave you plenty. Half a cord is about $1,000 worth of wood if I were to buy it, not to mention all the hours I spent cutting and splitting it. If the HOA wants firewood, you can purchase it like everyone else. Brenda's smile vanished. I see. So you are not willing to help your community. I did not say that. I donate to plenty of things, but my personal firewood supply is not up for donation. I worked hard for it. You know, Quentin, part of living in a community is being willing to share resources for the common good. I felt my jaw tighten. Brenda, the HOA does not have any rules about sharing personal property. I pay my dues. I follow the regulations. What I do with my own firewood on my own property is my business. She wrote something on her clipboard. We will see about that. Thank you for your time. They left, and I tried to put the conversation out of my mind. I should have known Brenda would not let it go. 3 days later, I received a formal letter from the HOA in my mailbox. It was printed on official letterhead and signed by Brenda. The letter stated that the HOA board had voted to implement a new community resource sharing initiative. According to this initiative, any resident with excess resources that could benefit the community was encouraged to donate those resources to common areas and activities. The letter specifically mentioned firewood, garden produce, and tools. It went on to say that while donations were currently voluntary, the board was considering making them mandatory in the future for the good of the community. At the bottom of the letter was a handwritten note from Brenda. Hope you will reconsider your decision. Community spirit is important here at Cedar Ridge Estates. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the recycling bin. They could not force me to give them my firewood. The HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions document that I had signed when I bought the house said nothing about sharing personal property. This was just Brenda trying to bully me into giving her what she wanted. The following Saturday, the HOA held one of their community gatherings at the fire pit. I could see the glow from my back deck and hear the laughter and conversation. Normally, I would have gone. I had actually been to a few of these events over the years and had contributed to them in my own way. In fact, for the past 2 years, I had been donating firewood to these gatherings voluntarily. Not huge amounts, but I would usually bring a wheelbarrow full of wood each time they had an event, maybe 20 or 30 logs. It was my way of being neighborly, and I had never minded doing it. But that was before Brenda demanded I share my supply. That was before she tried to make my voluntary generosity into a mandatory obligation. There is a big difference between choosing to give something and being told you have to give it. The moment she sent me that letter, I decided I was done donating firewood to the community fire pit. I stayed inside that evening, watching a movie and ignoring the festivities. Around 9 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Todd Martinez, one of my neighbors who lived 3 houses down. Todd was a good guy, a firefighter who worked 24-hour shifts and had 2 young kids. We had had beers together a few times and helped each other with various projects. "Hey man, you did not come to the fire pit tonight," Todd said. "Yeah, was not feeling it." "That is cool. Hey, I wanted to ask you something. Brenda mentioned at the meeting that you were not willing to donate firewood anymore. She made it sound like you were being difficult about it." I sighed and leaned against the doorframe. Did she mention that I have been donating wood to these events for the past 2 years voluntarily, or that she came to my property and demanded I share my personal firewood supply that I cut myself? Todd's eyebrows went up. No, she left that part out. She made it sound like the HOA had always bought all the wood and that you were refusing to chip in. Of course she did. I explained the situation to Todd, including the letter about the Community Resource Sharing Initiative. He shook his head. That is ridiculous, man. Your firewood is your property. She cannot force you to share it. I know. And honestly, Todd, I would not have minded continuing to bring some wood to the gatherings now and then. But the moment she tried to make it a demand, tried to make it seem like I was obligated to give her my property, I was done. I do not respond well to people trying to bully me. I do not blame you. For what it is worth, a lot of people at the meeting thought the whole resource sharing thing was weird. Brenda has been on a power trip lately. Appreciate you letting me know, Todd. After he left, I felt better knowing that at least some of my neighbors understood the situation. But I had a feeling this was far from over. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening. I normally did not attend these things, but I decided I needed to be there to address this situation directly. The meetings were held at the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that the HOA maintained. I arrived exactly at 7 o'clock. About 20 people were scattered around the room in folding chairs. Brenda sat at a table at the front with Susan and the other board members, Treasurer Gary Williams, and at-large member Patricia Moore. Brenda called the meeting to order and went through the usual business, approving minutes from the last meeting, discussing some landscaping issues at the entrance, and reviewing the budget. Then she got to new business. As many of you know, we have implemented a new community resource sharing initiative to help build neighborhood unity and reduce costs for community events. I am pleased to report that we have already had 3 residents sign up to donate garden produce next summer, and we have 1 resident who will be loaning tools to neighbors upon request. She looked directly at me. However, we are still in need of firewood donations for our community fire pit. Winter is here and we have several events planned. At $15 per bundle from the hardware store, the costs add up quickly. I raised my hand. Brenda looked annoyed but acknowledged me. Quentin, do you have something to add? I stood up. I want to clarify something for everyone here. Brenda approached me about donating firewood from my personal supply. What she did not mention is that I have been voluntarily donating wood to community fire pit events for the past 2 years. I never had a problem with it. However, when she came to my property and demanded that I share my firewood, and then sent me a letter threatening to make these donations mandatory, I decided I was no longer comfortable contributing. There were murmurs around the room. Several people looked surprised. Brenda's face flushed. I never demanded anything, Quentin. I simply suggested that sharing resources would benefit the community. You sent me a letter saying the board was considering making resource sharing mandatory. That sure sounds like a demand to me. Gary, the treasurer, spoke up. Brenda, I did not know anything about making resource sharing mandatory. We never voted on that. Brenda waved her hand dismissively. It was just a suggestion, something to consider in the future. Quentin is being overly sensitive. A woman in the back named Jennifer raised her hand. I think Quentin has a point. If he has been donating voluntarily for 2 years and now you are trying to force him to continue, that is not right. Personal property is personal property. Thank you, Jennifer, I said. Look, I am happy to contribute to this community in ways that I choose. I pay my dues on time every year. I keep my property maintained. I have helped multiple neighbors with projects, but I am not going to be bullied into giving away property that I worked hard for just because the HOA president thinks she is entitled to it. Several people nodded in agreement. Brenda looked furious. If that is your attitude, Quentin, then perhaps you are not the right fit for this community. The room went silent. That was a bold statement, essentially threatening me in front of everyone. I kept my voice calm. Are you threatening me, Brenda? Because I am pretty sure you cannot force someone out of a neighborhood because they will not give you their firewood. Patricia, the at-large board member, cleared her throat. Perhaps we should table this discussion for now and revisit it at a later date. Clearly there are some strong feelings here. Brenda glared at Patricia but agreed. The meeting moved on to other topics, but the tension in the room was thick. I stayed for the rest of the meeting just to make a point, then left. Over the next few weeks, things escalated in small, petty ways. I received a violation notice for having my trash cans visible from the street, even though they were in the exact same spot they had been for 5 years. I received another notice for having a non-approved mailbox, even though it was the same mailbox that had been there when I bought the house. Each violation came with a $50 fine if not corrected within 10 days. I took pictures of other houses in the neighborhood with their trash cans visible and mailboxes identical to mine. Then I wrote a formal letter to the HOA board citing selective enforcement and threatened to bring the issue to a lawyer if the harassment continued. The violation notices stopped, but the Cold War between Brenda and me was in full effect. December arrived, and with it came the first real snowstorm of the season. We got 14 inches overnight, and the temperature dropped to 10 degrees. I spent the morning clearing my driveway and walkways, then settled in front of my fireplace with a good book. My firewood was performing perfectly, providing steady, even heat throughout the house. That afternoon, Todd called me. "Hey, Quentin, you busy? Just staying warm. What is up?" I hate to ask, but do you have any firewood you could spare? Our furnace died this morning and the repair guy cannot come until tomorrow. The house is getting cold and I have got the kids here. I will pay you for it, whatever is fair. This was completely different from Brenda's demand. Todd was a friend in need, asking politely and offering to pay. "Of course, man. Come by and grab as much as you need. No charge. Are you sure?" "Absolutely. Give me 15 minutes to clear a path to the woodpile." Todd came by with his truck, and I helped him load about 1/4 of a cord of wood. His kids waited in the warm truck, their breath fogging the windows. Todd tried to give me $100, but I refused. "Just help me out sometime when I need it," I said. "You are a lifesaver, Quentin, thank you." After he left, I felt good about the interaction. That was what community was supposed to be about. People helping each other when genuinely needed, not HOA presidents demanding resources because they did not want to spend money. The next community fire pit event was scheduled for the Saturday before Christmas. It was supposed to be a big holiday gathering with hot chocolate and caroling. I watched from my window as residents gathered around the fire pit. The flame was noticeably smaller than usual, barely more than a campfire. Apparently, the HOA had decided to limit the amount of wood they were purchasing to control costs. Around 7:30, my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Brenda standing there with a fake smile plastered on her face. "Quentin, Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, Brenda." "Listen, I know we have had our differences, but I am hoping we can put that behind us. The fire pit event is not going well. The fire keeps dying down because we do not have enough good wood. Several families have already left because they are cold. Would you be willing to donate some firewood just for tonight? It would mean a lot to the children." There it was. The appeal to emotion, bringing children into it. Brenda. When Todd needed firewood last week because his furnace broke and his kids were cold, I gave him a 1/4 cord for free. When Jim down the street needed help fixing his fence last summer, I spent an entire Saturday helping him. When the Hendersons had their house fire 2 years ago, I donated $200 to their recovery fund. I contribute to this community in plenty of ways, but I am not giving you firewood. So you would rather see children disappointed on Christmas? I would rather see the HOA president take responsibility for her own poor planning. You knew you had an event tonight. You knew you needed firewood. You chose to cheap out and not buy enough. That is not my problem to solve. You are incredibly selfish, Quentin. And you are incredibly entitled. Have a good evening, Brenda. I closed the door. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from anger. The manipulation, the guilt trip, the way she tried to make me the bad guy for not giving her my property. It was infuriating. The fire pit event ended early. I could see people leaving, bundled up in their coats, heading back to their warm houses. Part of me felt bad for the kids who had been looking forward to a nice Christmas gathering. But I reminded myself that this was not my fault. Brenda could have purchased adequate firewood. She chose not to in order to try to prove a point. After Christmas, I received another letter from the HOA. This one informed me that my annual dues were increasing from $300 to $800. The letter explained that the board had voted to raise dues across the board to cover increased operational costs. However, when I looked at the details, I noticed something suspicious. The increase was not across the board. Only 5 homeowners were facing the increase, and I was one of them. I called Gary, the treasurer, directly. He was a reasonable guy who worked as an accountant and had always been fair in his dealings with the HOA finances. Gary, it is Quentin Larson. I have got a question about this dues increase letter I received. Hey, Quentin. Yeah, I figured you might call. This does not seem legal. You cannot just arbitrarily increase someone's dues without a valid reason. Gary sighed. Between you and me, I voted against it. Brenda pushed it through, claiming that certain properties require more HOA resources to maintain common areas near them. It is technically within her authority as president, but it is a gray area. Let me guess. The 5 people getting the increase are people who have crossed Brenda recently. I did not say that. You did not have to. This is retaliation, Gary. You know it, I know it. Is this really how the board wants to operate? Look, I am just the treasurer. I do the books. If you want to fight this, you will need to bring it up at the next board meeting or consult a lawyer. I consulted a lawyer. I called Nathan Warner, an attorney in town who specialized in property and HOA law. I had met him through a friend and knew he was good at his job. Nathan reviewed my HOA documents and the dues increase letter. After about an hour, he leaned back in his office chair and shook his head. This is absolutely retaliation, and it is against Montana HOA law. The regulations are clear. Any dues increase affecting only specific homeowners must be based on objective criteria, such as lot size, proximity to certain amenities, or measurable increased costs. Brenda's justification is vague and does not hold up. If you want to fight this, I can send them a letter explaining that the increase is invalid and threatening legal action if they do not rescind it. How much will that cost me? For a letter and the initial consultation, $500. If it goes further, we will negotiate a rate depending on what is needed. Do it. Nathan sent the letter the following week. 3 days later, I received a call from Brenda. Quentin, this is completely unnecessary. You are spending money on a lawyer over a dues increase. That is ridiculous. What is ridiculous is you trying to punish me for not giving you my firewood. The increase is illegal, Brenda. You know it, I know it, and now your board knows it. We were just trying to fairly distribute costs. Then why am I one of only 5 people receiving an increase? And why do all 5 of those people happen to have disagreed with you recently? Jennifer questioned you at the meeting and got an increase. Mark voted against you on the landscaping budget and got an increase. This is textbook retaliation. There was silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Brenda spoke, her voice tight. The board will review the increase. You do that. 2 weeks later, I received a letter stating that the dues increase had been rescinded due to administrative errors in calculation. It was a face-saving way for Brenda to back down, but I did not care. I had won that battle. However, Brenda was not done. In late January, she called an emergency HOA meeting. The notice was sent out with only 4 days advance warning, which was suspicious. The agenda listed only one item: discussion and vote on mandatory community contribution requirements. I attended the meeting, as did about 30 other residents, which was a much larger turnout than usual. Word had spread that Brenda was up to something. Brenda called the meeting to order and got straight to the point. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I have called this meeting because I believe it is time we address a growing problem in our community: selfishness. We have residents who have ample resources but refuse to share them for the common good. This individualistic attitude undermines what makes Cedar Ridge Estate special. I could feel eyes turning toward me. Therefore, I am proposing a new bylaw. Any resident who possesses resources deemed beneficial to community activities must contribute a reasonable portion of those resources upon request by the HOA board. This includes but is not limited to firewood, garden produce, tools, and equipment. Failure to comply would result in escalating fines, starting at $100 per incident. The room erupted. Multiple people started talking at once. You cannot force people to give up their property. This is insane. What defines reasonable? Who decides? Brenda banged a gavel on the table. Order, please. This is just a proposal. We are here to discuss and vote on it. I stood up. Brenda, this proposal is legally unenforceable. You cannot create a bylaw that violates basic property rights. Any lawyer would tear this apart in about 5 minutes. Actually, Quentin, HOAs have broad authority to create and enforce rules for the good of the community. I have consulted with an attorney, and this bylaw is within our rights. Then your attorney is either lying to you or incompetent. Property rights are protected under both Montana state law and the U.S. Constitution. You cannot simply declare that private property is now community property. Jennifer, the woman who had supported me at the previous meeting, stood up. I think what really needs to happen here is a vote of no confidence in our current HOA president. Brenda has been abusing her authority, retaliating against residents who disagree with her, and wasting our time with proposals like this. I move for a vote of no confidence. Several people clapped. Susan, the secretary, looked uncomfortable. That is not on the agenda. I do not care, Jennifer said. I am making a motion. Does anyone second it? I second it, said Mark, one of the other residents who had received the illegal dues increase. Brenda looked panicked. You cannot just call for a vote like that. There are procedures. Gary pulled out his copy of the HOA bylaws and flipped through it. Actually, according to Section 7, Article 3, any homeowner can call for a vote of no confidence in a board member at any official HOA meeting if the motion is seconded and supported by at least 10% of the total membership. We have 96 homes in the HOA, so we would need at least 10 homeowners to support bringing it to a vote. All in favor of bringing a vote of no confidence to the floor, raise your hands, Jennifer said. Hands went up around the room. I counted 14, well over the threshold. Brenda's face was red. Fine. We will vote. All in favor of removing me as HOA president, raise your hands. Wait, Gary interjected. The vote is supposed to be by secret ballot to prevent intimidation. That is also in the bylaws. Brenda glared at him but could not argue. Susan scrambled to find paper and pens. Ballots were distributed and we all voted. Susan collected them and counted while we waited in tense silence. Finally, she looked up. 28 votes in favor of removal, 6 against. Brenda stood up so quickly her chair fell over. This is absurd. I have done more for this community than anyone. You are all ungrateful. Brenda, you need to turn over all HOA documents and accounts to Gary by the end of the week, Gary said calmly. Those are the rules. She grabbed her coat and purse and stormed out. The meeting dissolved into conversation and, honestly, a feeling of relief. People came up to me and apologized for Brenda's behavior. Jennifer gave me a high five. That has been a long time coming, she said. We held a new election the following month. Patricia Moore, the at-large board member who had always been reasonable, was elected as the new president. One of the first things she did was formally rescind the Community Resource Sharing Initiative and issue an apology to the residents who had been targeted by Brenda's retaliation. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. In March, I was working in my garage on a Saturday afternoon when a sheriff's deputy pulled into my driveway. My stomach dropped. I walked out to meet him. Are you Quentin Larson? Yes, sir. Is there a problem? I've got a complaint filed against you for theft. A Brenda Patterson claims you stole approximately 4 cords of firewood from her property. I stared at him. You have got to be kidding me. You know Miss Patterson? Unfortunately, yes. She is my former HOA president, and we had a dispute about firewood months ago. I never stole anything from her. I cut my own firewood from my friend's property in the mountains. I have receipts for the gas I bought for the chainsaw, photos of me cutting and splitting the wood, and witnesses who helped me haul it. The deputy nodded, taking notes. Can you show me where you store your firewood? I walked him around back to my neatly stacked woodpile. It was noticeably smaller now, down to about 1.5 cords after using it all winter and giving some to Todd. How long have you had this woodpile? I cut it in late October and early November. It has been here ever since. And you have proof that you cut it yourself? Absolutely. Give me a minute. I went inside and grabbed my phone, showing him photos I had taken during the cutting process. There were pictures of me with my chainsaw next to fallen trees, shots of me splitting logs, and several of me loading the wood into my truck. I also had text message exchanges with my friend Eric, who owned the property, confirming the dates and that he had given me permission to clear the dead trees. The deputy looked through everything carefully. This seems pretty clear-cut to me. You know why Miss Patterson would file a false report. I explained the entire situation, from Brenda demanding I share my firewood to her eventual removal as HOA president. The deputy shook his head. Sounds like harassment. I will file my report stating there is no basis for the theft claim. You might want to consider filing a counter-complaint for filing a false police report, especially if this continues. I am hoping it will not come to that. Keep all this documentation handy, just in case. After he left, I was furious. Filing a false police report was a serious accusation. Brenda was trying to escalate this into criminal territory, and it was beyond petty. I called Nathan, my attorney. He advised me to file a restraining order and to pursue charges for filing a false police report. I was hesitant to take such a serious step, but Nathan insisted. Quentin, this woman is not going to stop. She has already tried to illegally fine you, retaliate against you, and now she has filed a false police report. You need to draw a clear line or she will keep coming after you. I agreed. We filed the necessary paperwork, and Brenda was served with a temporary restraining order and a notice to appear in court regarding the false police report. The court date was set for early May. When the day arrived, I dressed in a suit and met Nathan at the courthouse in downtown Cedar Ridge. It was a small county courthouse, built in the 1970s with that characteristic brown brick and narrow windows. Brenda showed up with her own lawyer, a guy named Dennis, who looked about as enthusiastic as someone attending a root canal. We sat on opposite sides of the courtroom while the judge reviewed the case files. Judge Martha Henley was in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a bun and a no-nonsense demeanor. She looked over her reading glasses at both parties. "Miss Patterson, you filed a police report claiming Mr. Larson stole 4 cords of firewood from your property. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor. He had a large supply of firewood, and I know he did not cut it all himself. It had to have come from somewhere." "Did you have any evidence that the firewood came from your property?" "Well, no, but I assumed." "You assumed? Did you actually have 4 cords of firewood stolen from your property?" Brenda hesitated. "I had some firewood that went missing. How much? I am not exactly sure." Judge Henley looked unimpressed. "So you are not sure if any wood was actually stolen, and you have no evidence connecting Mr. Larson to any missing firewood, yet you filed a police report accusing him of theft, Your Honor. This man has been difficult and uncooperative with the HOA for months. He refused to donate firewood to community events and, Miss Patterson, being uncooperative with an HOA is not a crime. Filing a false police report, however, is. Mr. Warner, please present your evidence." Nathan stood and presented all the documentation. The photos of me cutting wood, the receipts, the text messages, the testimony from the deputy who investigated, and statements from Todd and Eric confirming my story. Judge Henley reviewed everything carefully. When she finished, she looked at Brenda with clear displeasure. "Miss Patterson, it is evident that you filed this police report not because you believed a crime had been committed, but as retaliation against Mr. Larson for refusing to comply with your demands. This is a serious abuse of the legal system. I am finding you guilty of filing a false police report, a misdemeanor. You are hereby fined $500 and required to complete 40 hours of community service. Additionally, I am granting Mr. Larson's request for a restraining order. You are to have no contact with him, directly or indirectly, and you must stay at least 500 feet away from his property except when necessary to access your own residence. Do you understand?" Brenda looked like she had been slapped. "Your Honor, do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Mr. Larson, I am also awarding you court costs and reasonable attorney fees to be paid by Miss Patterson. The clerk will calculate the amount." We left the courthouse victorious. Nathan shook my hand on the steps outside. That went about as well as it could have. Hopefully this puts an end to her harassment. "I hope so too. Thanks for everything, Nathan." "Anytime, and Quentin, keep documenting everything just in case. People like Brenda do not always give up easily." He was right to be cautious. But as it turned out, the court case and the restraining order finally broke Brenda's will to continue the fight. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was embarrassed by the whole situation and was keeping a low profile. She stopped attending HOA meetings and eventually put her house up for sale in July. Life in Cedar Ridge Estates slowly returned to normal. Patricia proved to be an excellent HOA president, focusing on actual community improvements rather than power trips and personal vendettas. The community fire pit events continued, with the HOA budgeting appropriately for firewood purchased from local suppliers. One evening in late August, Todd stopped by with a 6-pack of beer. We sat on my back deck, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Did you hear Brenda finally sold her house?" Todd said. "Yeah, I heard. Good riddance. You know, the new family moving in seems really nice. They have 3 kids and the husband is into woodworking. I told him you have a workshop and might be someone good to know." "Always happy to meet another woodworker." Todd took a sip of his beer. I have been meaning to tell you, man, I really respected how you handled that whole situation. You stood your ground but did not turn into a jerk about it. You could have made a bigger deal out of it, could have been vindictive, but you just wanted to be left alone. It was never about being difficult. It was about the principle. The moment someone demands what is yours and acts like they are entitled to it, you have to draw a line. If I had given in, Brenda would have just kept pushing for more. Well, you definitely made your point, and for what it is worth, you helped me out when I really needed it. That is what community should actually be about. Exactly. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the beer and the evening air. The nightmare with Brenda was behind me, and I had my firewood, my peace, and my principles intact. As fall approached again, I started making plans for another wood-cutting trip. Eric called me in mid-September and told me he had several more dead trees that needed to come down. I took a weekend, drove up to his property with my truck and chainsaw, and spent 2 days cutting and splitting. The work was hard and satisfying, and I felt good knowing I was preparing for another winter. When I got back home and started stacking the wood, my new neighbor, the woodworker Todd had mentioned, walked over. His name was Michael, and he was probably in his mid-30s with a friendly smile. "That is a nice pile of wood you have got there," he said. "Thanks. Just got back from cutting it. You cut it yourself. That is impressive. I have been thinking about getting a chainsaw and doing the same thing. The wood they sell at the hardware store is so expensive. It is a lot of work, but it is worth it. If you want, I can show you some tips on cutting and splitting safely." "That would be great. I appreciate it." We talked for a while about woodworking projects, and I invited him to check out my workshop sometime. It was nice to have a neighbor who shared similar interests, and who approached interactions with respect and genuine friendliness, rather than demands and entitlement. The following week, the HOA held their fall kickoff meeting. Patricia asked me if I would be willing to volunteer for the neighborhood cleanup day in October. I agreed. It was a task I could actually help with, and it did not involve anyone demanding my personal property. At the meeting, Patricia also brought up the community fire pit. We have budgeted funds for firewood for the winter season. However, if anyone would like to voluntarily donate wood, we would certainly appreciate it. The emphasis is on voluntarily. No one is required or expected to contribute personal resources. After the meeting, I approached Patricia. "I would be happy to donate some firewood to the community events this year, like I used to before all the drama with Brenda." Patricia smiled. "That would be wonderful, Quentin, but only if you are comfortable with it." "I am." "The difference is that you are asking respectfully and making it clear that it is voluntary. That is all I ever wanted." "Well, we appreciate it. Community works best when people want to help, not when they are forced to." Over the course of that winter, I donated probably half a cord of wood to various community fire pit events. I did it because I wanted to, because I was part of a community that I genuinely liked now that the toxic leadership was gone. The events were well attended and enjoyable, and nobody ever made me feel like I was obligated to contribute more than I chose to. One December evening, I was attending the holiday fire pit gathering, standing around the large, warm fire with my neighbors. Kids were roasting marshmallows, adults were chatting and drinking hot cider, and someone had brought a guitar and was leading Christmas carols. It was the kind of community experience that made living in an HOA worthwhile. Michael, my woodworker neighbor, stood next to me warming his hands. "This is really nice," he said. "Our old neighborhood never did anything like this." "Yeah, it is pretty great. It got a little rocky for a while, but things are good now." "I heard some stories about the previous HOA president. Sounds like she was a piece of work." That is putting it mildly. Jennifer walked over with her husband, carrying mugs of hot chocolate. Quentin, I just wanted to thank you again for standing up to Brenda last year. I know it cost you time and money with lawyers and everything, but you really did the whole neighborhood a favor. I appreciate that, Jennifer. Honestly, I was just trying to protect what was mine. I did not set out to start a revolution. Sometimes that is how revolutions start. One person saying no when everyone else is too afraid to speak up. I thought about that as the evening continued. It was true that I had not set out to challenge Brenda or change the HOA. I had simply refused to be bullied into giving up something I had worked hard for. But in doing so, I had forced the issue, brought the problem to light, and ultimately helped create a better community for everyone. As winter deepened and I burned through my firewood supply, I felt satisfied not just with the warmth it provided, but with what it represented. It was a tangible result of my own labor, my own planning, and my own resources. Nobody had the right to demand it from me, and I had been willing to fight to protect that principle. The firewood itself was just wood, but the principle was everything. It was about property rights, about standing up to bullies, about the difference between genuine community spirit and forced compliance. I had learned that being a good neighbor did not mean surrendering your autonomy or your possessions. It meant contributing what you could, when you could, because you wanted to, not because someone with a clipboard and a power trip demanded it. By the time spring arrived and my woodpile was down to just a few logs, I was already planning my next cutting trip. Eric had called to say he had even more dead trees that needed clearing. I was looking forward to the work, to the physical labor, and to the satisfaction of stacking another supply of firewood behind my garage. And this time, I knew that nobody would be knocking on my door demanding I share it. The new HOA leadership understood boundaries. My neighbors understood respect. And Brenda was long gone, hopefully learning in her new neighborhood that community is built on mutual respect, not coercion. I thought about drafting an article for the HOA newsletter about the whole experience, about the lessons learned and the importance of respecting property rights within community living. But I decided against it. The people who mattered already understood. The ones who did not probably would not learn from an article. Instead, I focused on being the kind of neighbor I wanted to have. Helpful when asked, respectful of boundaries, willing to contribute but not willing to be taken advantage of. It was a balance that required awareness and sometimes confrontation, but it was worth it. One warm Saturday afternoon in May, I was in my workshop building a new bookshelf when Michael knocked on the open door. "Hey, Quentin, you got a minute?" "Sure, come on in. I wanted to show you something." He held up his phone, showing me pictures of a woodpile behind his garage. "I took your advice and went up to the National Forest land with a permit, cut and split my first cord of wood." I grinned. "That looks great, man. How did it feel?" "Honestly, it was exhausting, but also really satisfying." "I get why you do it now. There is something about providing for yourself, you know." "Exactly. And next winter, when you are burning that wood in your fireplace, you will appreciate it even more because you know exactly how much work went into it." I am already planning my next trip. "Oh, and my wife wanted me to invite you over for dinner next Friday if you are free. She makes amazing lasagna." "I would love to. Thanks for the invitation." After he left, I stood in my workshop surrounded by tools and projects and felt content. This was what I had wanted when I bought this house 5 years ago. A place where I could work with my hands, be part of a community on my own terms and live without unnecessary drama. The situation with Brenda had tested that vision and had cost me time, money, and stress. But ultimately, it had reinforced my values and had improved the community for everyone. The HOA was functioning better. Neighbors were more aware of the importance of respecting boundaries, and the culture of entitlement that Brenda had tried to create had been rejected decisively. As summer arrived and I started planning my fall wood-cutting trip, I realized that the whole experience had taught me something important. Standing up for yourself, even in small matters like firewood, can have ripples that extend far beyond the immediate issue. It can change organizational culture, can inspire others to stand up for themselves, and can create lasting positive change. I never did get an apology from Brenda. The restraining order meant she could not contact me, and even if she could, I doubted she would have admitted she was wrong. But I did not need an apology. The outcome spoke for itself. The neighborhood continued to thrive. New families moved in, including a couple with young children who bought Brenda's old house. They were friendly and normal, and their kids loved playing in the snow and helping with yard work. The HOA, under Patricia's leadership, focused on practical improvements, fixing the playground equipment, maintaining the common areas, organizing genuinely voluntary community events. At one of the fall HOA meetings, someone suggested creating a tool library where neighbors could borrow equipment they did not use frequently. It was presented as a truly voluntary system where people could contribute if they wanted to, but were under no obligation. Several people, including me, agreed to participate. I contributed a post-hole digger and a power washer that I only used a few times a year. It worked well because it was genuinely voluntary, based on trust and properly organized. That, I realized, was the difference between Brenda's resource-sharing initiative and this tool library. One was about control and forced compliance. The other was about genuine sharing and mutual benefit. One was top-down and demanded. The other was bottom-up and offered. On a cold December evening, almost exactly 2 years after the initial confrontation with Brenda, I found myself at another community fire pit gathering. The fire was large and warm, burning through wood that the HOA had properly budgeted for and purchased. I had also contributed a wheelbarrow full of wood from my personal supply, thrown in because I wanted to, not because anyone expected it. Todd stood next to me, his kids running around with the other children, playing tag in the snow. "Hard to believe it has been 2 years since all that drama with Brenda," he said. "Time flies. Things are a lot better now." "No kidding. Patricia is doing a great job as president. And hey, I have been meaning to ask you, are you heading up to Eric's property to cut wood again this year?" "Planning on it. Probably next weekend." "Why? Think I could come along? I want to learn how to do it properly, and Michael said you taught him last year." "Absolutely. It is hard work, but I could use the help, and I will teach you what I know." "Bring your truck, and we will get you a supply of wood too." "Perfect. Thanks, man." As the evening continued, I looked around at my neighbors, at the community that had been tested and had come out stronger. The fire pit glowed warm and bright, fueled by properly purchased wood and supplemented by voluntary contributions. Kids laughed and played. Adults chatted and relaxed. It was everything a community event should be. And in my backyard, stacked neatly behind my garage, was a full supply of firewood that I had cut, split, and stored through my own effort. It was mine. Nobody demanded it. Nobody felt entitled to it. And I shared it when I chose to, on my own terms, with people I genuinely wanted to help. That was the way it should be. That was the principle I had fought for. And looking around at this healthy, functional community, I knew it had been worth every moment of the fight. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up into the cold winter sky. I sipped my hot chocolate, felt the warmth of the flames, and smiled. Sometimes standing your ground means standing alone for a while. But if you stand for the right principles, eventually others will stand with you. And that is how real communities are built, not through demands and entitlement, but through respect, boundaries, and genuine voluntary cooperation. As I drove home that evening, my truck crunching through the snow-covered streets of Cedar Ridge Estates, I felt grateful for everything that had happened, even the difficult parts. The confrontation with Brenda had been stressful and had cost me money in legal fees. But it had also taught me about the importance of principles, about the value of standing up to bullies, and about the difference between genuine community and forced compliance. My firewood supply would last me through the winter. In the spring, I would help Todd and Michael with their next cutting trips, passing on the knowledge and skills I had learned. The cycle would continue, based not on demands or obligations, but on genuine relationships and mutual respect. That was the real lesson of the firewood dispute. It was never really about the wood. It was about respect, about property rights, about the fundamental question of whether we control our own possessions and make our own decisions about how to use them. I had answered that question clearly. Yes, we do. And I had been willing to fight to protect that answer. As I pulled into my driveway and looked at my house, at the smoke curling from my chimney where my own firewood burned in my own fireplace, I felt deeply satisfied. This was my home, my property, my life. I was part of a community, but on my own terms. I contributed when I chose to, helped when I could, and maintained firm boundaries when necessary. And I had 3 cords of firewood stacked behind my garage that nobody could demand, nobody could claim, and nobody could take. It was mine, earned through my own labor, and that made all the difference. The lights were on inside my house, warm and welcoming. I went inside, added a few logs to the fire, and settled into my favorite chair with a book. Outside, the snow continued to fall softly, blanketing Cedar Ridge Estates in white. Inside, I was warm, comfortable, and at peace. Sometimes the best victories are the quiet ones, where you stand your ground, protect what is yours, and create a better situation for everyone in the process. This had been one of those victories. And as I sat by my fireplace, burning the wood I had cut myself, I knew that I would never regret standing up to Brenda, no matter how difficult it had been at the time, because principles matter, property rights matter. And the difference between voluntary generosity and forced compliance matters more than most people realize. I had learned those lessons the hard way, but I had learned them well. And Cedar Ridge Estates was a better community because one person had been willing to say no to unreasonable demands and yes to genuine respect and cooperation. The fire crackled peacefully, and I smiled.